The morning light filtered weakly through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the worn wooden table where I sat alone, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. It was one of those mornings where the silence felt heavy, pressing down on me like the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. I was lost in thought when a soft flutter near the door caught my attention. An envelope, thick and cream-colored with gold embossing, had slipped through the mail slot and rested on the floor. I recognized the handwriting immediately, elegant, precise, and unmistakably hers. My daughter's. Emily. I bent down to pick it up, feeling the smooth texture of the cardstock beneath my fingers. The weight of it was disproportionate to its size, almost as if it carried the gravity of all the moments we had lost between us. I hesitated for a moment before carefully slipping my finger under the flap and pulling out the invitation inside. The words were perfect, flawless script announcing the union of Emily Donahue and Thomas Adler, requesting my presence at their wedding. The venue was a lavish country club I had never heard of, one dripping with marble and chandeliers, a world away from the modest home where Emily had grown up. As I read, my eyes caught the phrase, "together with their families," and yet, there was a cold emptiness in those words. The invitation made no mention of me beyond the simple header, Mr. Frank L. Donahue. No father of the bride. No acknowledgement of the man who had raised her alone after her mother passed away when Emily was just a child. No hint of the countless nights I stayed awake, soothing her fears during thunderstorms, or the sacrifices I made so she could have a better life. Just an invitation. A polite, distant gesture. I folded the card carefully and set it on the table as if it were fragile. For a moment, I sat frozen, staring at nothing, feeling the ache of absence as if it were a physical wound. The days that followed were filled with a strange kind of emptiness. Emily didn't call. She didn't text. It was as if the invitation had been the last thread connecting us, and now it too was fraying beyond repair. Then, just as the wedding date crept closer, another letter arrived. This one came in a plain white envelope with a government seal stamped on the corner. My name was printed neatly across the front, but there was no warmth in the typeface. It felt official, cold, and ominous. I opened it with a sense of foreboding. Inside was a letter from the executor of a trust, a man I had never met but whose words would change everything. It explained that Harold R. Walker, my late father-in-law and Emily's grandfather, had passed away 6 months earlier. I had thought little of him in recent years, a man withdrawn and distant, especially after Margaret's death. But the letter revealed that he had named me the sole beneficiary of his private trust. $5 million. $5 million left to me. A man who had struggled to keep his family afloat on a modest paycheck, who had never imagined such wealth would find its way to him. The paper trembled in my hands as I read the amount again and again, disbelief mingling with a strange sense of detachment. I didn't know what to do with this sudden windfall. It wasn't something I could share lightly with a daughter who had already begun to drift away from me. So I kept it a secret. I didn't tell Emily. I didn't tell anyone. I opened a private account at the bank and quietly deposited the inheritance. No celebrations. No announcements. Just silence. It wasn't greed that kept me quiet. It was instinct. A deep, gnawing sense that revealing this secret too soon might shatter what little remained of our fragile relationship. And so, I waited. I waited for the day when I would understand what to do with this gift, this burden. Little did I know, the real challenge was only beginning. The evening of the family dinner arrived like a slow storm rolling in from the horizon, quiet, but loaded with tension. Emily's new home was unlike anything I had known her to live in before. As I stepped onto the polished marble floor of their spacious entryway, I felt the cold air of unfamiliarity settle over me. I could hear the muted laughter and clinking of glasses through the open doors leading to the dining room. Emily appeared almost instantly, gliding toward me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Dad," she said quickly, "try to keep it light tonight. Remember, Thomas's family is delicate about things." I nodded, swallowing the lump that had lodged itself deep in my throat. Inside, the room was filled with people whose faces I barely recognized. Thomas's parents stood proudly by the fireplace, exchanging glances that seemed to say, "Who invited the old man?" Their smiles were thin, their eyes cold. "Frank," Thomas's father said, extending a hand that was firm but measured. "Welcome." I shook his hand, noticing the expensive watch on his wrist and the subtle scent of his cologne. It was the kind of greeting that felt more like a transaction than a welcome. Dinner began with polite conversation, but every word felt weighted and calculated. I answered questions about my job, which I had retired from months ago, and dodged veiled insinuations about my financial status. At one point, Thomas's mother, a woman with perfectly coiffed hair and a voice like silk, remarked, "It must be challenging managing on a single income these days. The world changes so fast." I smiled politely. "It has its difficulties, but I manage." Emily shot me a look, a silent plea to stop talking, to not make things worse. Later, Thomas's father leaned in slightly and asked with a thin smile, "Frank, have you thought about your role in the wedding? Perhaps contributing a gift, or assistance?" I felt a sharp pang in my chest. "Emily hasn't asked me for anything," I replied evenly. "I'm happy to help if she needs." The room fell silent for a heartbeat before the mother replied, "Of course, we understand. Weddings can be quite costly." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and rehearsed pleasantries. Emily barely spoke to me beyond curt nods. When the evening ended, she walked me to the door with a hurried, "Thanks for coming, Dad," that sounded more like an obligation than affection. As I closed the door behind me, the weight of being an outsider pressed down harder than ever. I realized that this was not just about money or gifts. It was about being erased, replaced by a new family, a new life that I was no longer part of. Walking back to my small apartment, the night air bit at my skin, but the cold inside me was far deeper. I thought about the $5 million quietly sitting in my bank account. The secret that was both a shield and a sword. I didn't know then what I would do with it. But I knew one thing. I wasn't finished yet. The days after that dinner stretched out like an endless gray ribbon. I found myself waking up each morning with a pit in my stomach, half hoping to hear from Emily and half dreading it. But the phone stayed silent. No texts. No calls. Not even a message. It was as if I had vanished, quietly erased from her life. I sat alone in my apartment most evenings, staring at the muted glow of the television, but the images never really registered. My mind was elsewhere, tangled in memories and questions I dared not ask. I thought about the last time I had seen Emily before the engagement. She was still so full of dreams and trust then. We'd talked late into the night, planning her future, laughing over her silly wedding dress ideas. Now those moments felt like a different lifetime. One afternoon, as I walked my dog through the neighborhood park, I ran into Mark, an old friend from years past. His easy smile and familiar presence felt like a balm to my weary soul. "Frank," he said, clapping me on the back, "you look like you're carrying the weight of the world." I managed a faint smile. "Family stuff." He nodded knowingly. "You know, sometimes people don't realize what they have until it's too late." I looked away, swallowing the lump in my throat. Mark's words echoed in my mind as I watched families laughing around picnic tables, children chasing each other in the fading light. That night, I opened the letter from the trust once again, running my fingers over the paper as if it might offer me some secret. $5 million. Sitting quietly in my account. The money was a strange comfort and an unbearable burden all at once. I had the means to give Emily everything she wanted, a new home, new car, endless vacations. But I knew giving her that now wouldn't heal the growing distance between us. It might even make things worse. So I decided to keep the secret a little longer. To wait. To see what would happen next. About a week after that quiet stretch, my phone rang one evening. The caller ID displayed a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, the voice on the other end was unmistakably firm and businesslike. "Mr. Donahue, this is Melissa Grant, attorney for Emily Donahue and Mr. Thomas Adler. I'm reaching out to discuss some matters regarding family finances and the upcoming wedding expenses." I sat back, the sudden seriousness settling in like a stone in my chest. I hadn't expected this call. Not now, not like this. Of course, Ms. Grant. What would you like to discuss? I asked, keeping my voice steady. There's been some talk, Mr. Donahue, she continued, regarding an inheritance from Mr. Harold Walker's estate, specifically, a trust that you are reportedly the beneficiary of. This has raised concerns among family members about the management and potential distribution of these funds, especially in light of the wedding. I took a deep breath. The secret I'd been guarding so carefully was now out in the open, at least among lawyers and family representatives. I see, I replied quietly. What exactly are they expecting from me? Ms. Grant hesitated for a moment before answering. Nothing at this time. But Emily wanted to ensure there is transparency and understanding before the wedding. She feels it's important for family harmony. I didn't mention the conflicted feelings rising inside me, relief that Emily cared enough to be involved, mixed with the sting of intrusion. Tell Emily I understand, I said, and that I'm willing to discuss whatever she needs. We ended the call shortly after, but the weight of it lingered. I knew the inheritance was no longer just a private matter. It was becoming a wedge, a point of contention threatening to fracture what little remained of our family bond. The day finally came, a crisp spring morning that promised warmth but delivered a chill in my heart. The world outside buzzed with excitement, floral arrangements blossomed along the walkways, and laughter echoed from the grand country club where Emily and Thomas were to be wed. I stood among the guests, a solitary figure in a tailored but simple suit, feeling as out of place as a faded photograph forgotten in an attic. The room shimmered with expensive dresses, sparkling jewelry, and the hum of conversations filled with hopes and new beginnings, none of which seemed meant for me. Emily appeared at the top of the aisle, radiant in a gown that hugged her slender frame and shimmered with delicate lace. Her smile was bright, but I searched her eyes and found only a distant flicker, a hesitance that spoke volumes. When the moment arrived for me to walk her down the aisle, I felt a surge of something raw and painful, an aching hope that this simple act would bridge the widening gap between us. But instead, Thomas stepped forward without hesitation, gently taking Emily's arm as if the role of father was already his. The officiant barely acknowledged me. The crowd's eyes shifted, and a quiet murmur spread through the room. I swallowed hard and took my seat. The ceremony passed in a blur. Vows were exchanged, promises made, and smiles shared. But the space beside me, empty and cold, screamed louder than any words. After the ceremony, I watched Emily dance and laugh with her new family, the man she'd chosen standing proudly by her side. I felt invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of a life that was no longer mine. That night, as I lay awake in my modest apartment, the silence was deafening. The $5 million inheritance gleamed in my bank account, a treasure I hadn't touched. It felt both like a gift and a curse, a symbol of the past I'd lost and the future I wasn't sure I wanted. But one thing was certain, I was no longer just a bystander. The days following the wedding felt like walking through a fog, everything blurred and distant, yet unbearably sharp inside my chest. Emily had become a different person, or maybe she was just showing who she really was all along. The warmth we once shared had cooled into cold indifference, and every attempt I made to reach out was met with silence or resentment. One afternoon, I called her, just a simple, "How are you?" and waited. The line rang out several times before her voicemail picked up. I left a message, hoping to hear back, but hours passed, then days, with no response. I thought about the messages I'd received now, not from Emily herself, but from her husband or even his parents. Curt requests for money, for help with bills, for favors that felt more like demands. A week later, an email came through. Subject line, financial assistance. It was a detailed list of expenses, a down payment on a new car, a vacation plan for next month, remodeling costs for their home. None of it had been discussed with me beforehand. It was as if my role was reduced to a wallet, not a father. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the screen, feeling a mixture of hurt and quiet rage. I typed a short reply. Emily, I am here if you truly need help. But I am not a bank. We need to talk. That was all. The reply came quickly, cold and sharp. You never understand me, Dad. You never have. It stung more than any words had in years. Days later, my phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Emily herself. Why won't you support me? Thomas and I are building a life. Are you going to stand in the way? I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling. This was no longer just about money or distance. This was a battle for respect, for recognition, for the family I thought I still had. The truth was, the $5 million inheritance sat untouched. It was my secret weapon, not for grand gestures or revenge, but a quiet assurance that I still had power over my own life. I began making plans, careful and deliberate. No rash decisions. No angry words. Just slow, measured moves, the kind of power that doesn't shout, but whispers. I spent many nights alone in my apartment, the city's distant hum seeping through cracked windows like a lullaby for the restless. The glow of my desk lamp cast long shadows across stacks of paperwork and the soft clink of a glass on the nightstand. It was in these quiet hours that I plotted, not out of anger, but out of a slow-burning resolve. The inheritance wasn't just money. It was a lifeline, a final thread tying me to a family that seemed intent on erasing me. I didn't want to wield it like a weapon. I wanted to reclaim my dignity. I began by contacting a trusted financial advisor, someone who had helped me before with careful investments and planning. I explained my situation without divulging too much. I want to secure my future, I said simply. The advisor nodded, sensing the unspoken pain beneath my words. It's wise to protect your assets, Frank. But what matters more is how you choose to use them. I thought about Emily and Thomas, about their glittering new life and the cold shoulders I'd been given. I thought about the years I'd sacrificed and the moments lost. But I also thought about me, about the man I still was beneath the bruises. Meanwhile, Emily's messages grew more frequent and urgent. She called me late at night, her voice trembling between anger and desperation. I listened quietly, offering little but a calm presence. She wanted money, approval, validation. But I knew that no amount of dollars could heal the wounds between us. Instead, I chose silence. Then came the day I quietly purchased a small property, not to flaunt, but to establish a foundation separate from the chaos. A place where I could rebuild, away from the shadows of betrayal. It was my subtle message: I was still here. I was still standing. And I would decide when, how, and if Emily could be part of this new chapter. There was no dramatic confrontation, no explosive showdown. Just a slow, deliberate reclaiming of control, the kind that doesn't shout, but echoes long after the room has emptied. Weeks slipped by with an uneasy quiet settling over our fractured family. Emily's calls became less frequent, her messages less demanding. It was as if, in the distance, she sensed the walls closing in, not with rage, but with calm resolve. One evening, I received an unexpected text. "Can we meet? Just talk." Her words were simple but heavy with unspoken meaning. I debated for hours before replying with a single line. "Tomorrow. Coffee. Noon." The next day, I found myself sitting across from Emily at a small cafe tucked away from the city's bustle. The air between us was thick with history, love, pain, and years of silence. She looked different, tired, maybe, but softened around the edges. The defiance in her eyes was still there, but so was a flicker of something else, regret. "I don't want to fight any more, Dad," she began hesitantly. "I thought I was doing what was best, but maybe I was wrong." I listened without interrupting, letting her words fill the space. "I guess I was scared," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Scared of losing everything, including you." We talked for hours, revisiting old memories, airing grievances, and beginning to rebuild bridges neither of us knew were still standing. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a fairy tale. But it was a start. As I left the cafe, a quiet hope settled in my chest. The road ahead was uncertain, but maybe, just maybe, family could mean more than money or grudges. The fragile truce we had forged at the cafe was only the beginning of a long, complicated journey. Rebuilding trust with Emily required more than a single conversation. It demanded time, patience, and respect, qualities that had been scarce between us in recent years. I realized that to protect myself and the inheritance, I needed clear boundaries. I could no longer be the silent well of endless support, nor the open wallet for demands disguised as needs. So I sat down and wrote Emily a letter. It was honest, firm, but not unkind. I told her that I loved her and always would, but that our relationship needed to be rebuilt on mutual respect. I made it clear that while I was willing to help in times of genuine need, I would no longer be taken for granted. I proposed regular meetings, no pressure, no expectations, just a chance to connect without the shadows of money or resentment looming over us. Weeks passed before I received a reply. Emily's words were cautious but hopeful. She agreed to the terms. We began meeting every other weekend, coffee shops, quiet parks, sometimes just phone calls. Our conversations weren't always easy. Sometimes old wounds bled anew, sometimes we stumbled over misunderstandings. But each encounter peeled back layers of pain and built something steadier beneath. Through it all, the inheritance remained untouched. It was no longer a secret weapon, but a silent guardian, reminding me that I had the power to choose my path, and who I let walk beside me. Our new arrangement, regular meetings with Emily, felt like walking a tightrope stretched over a deep chasm of past grievances and broken trust. Every conversation was a delicate dance, a balance between hope and hesitation. I remember our first coffee together after the letter. The cafe was small and cozy, the kind of place that smelled of fresh pastries and roasted beans. Emily arrived early, her hands wrapped around a warm cup, her eyes searching mine for signs of forgiveness. We talked about small things at first, work, the weather, a book I was reading. But beneath the surface, every word was heavy with unspoken history. I could see the guardedness in her posture, the way she hesitated before sharing anything personal. When she finally opened up about her struggles, her fears of not being good enough, her insecurities about fitting into Thomas's wealthy world, I felt a pang of empathy I hadn't expected. I thought I needed to prove myself, she said quietly. But maybe I was just running away from who I really am. I nodded, remembering my own mistakes, the times I'd let pride and silence push us apart. It's never too late to come home, I told her softly. Our conversations grew deeper over time. We shared memories from her childhood, laughing over the silly things she used to do, reminiscing about her mother's favorite recipes, the long walks we took in the park. Yet, there were moments when the old wounds cracked open. Arguments flared, about money, about respect, about the choices we both regretted. After one particularly heated exchange, I found myself alone in my apartment, staring at the ceiling, wondering if we were fooling ourselves. But then, Emily called the next day. Her voice was hesitant, apologetic. "I want to try," she said simply. And that made all the difference. Meanwhile, I continued managing the inheritance cautiously. It was no longer a secret to me. It was a responsibility. I invested wisely, planning for a future that included not just financial security, but peace. For the first time in years, I felt a cautious optimism creeping into my days. As the fragile rebuilding of our relationship progressed, I found an unexpected source of support. Sarah, Emily's younger sister. She was only 22, still navigating her own path through college and life's uncertainties, but her warmth and sincerity reminded me of better times. One afternoon, Sarah called me out of the blue. Her voice was tentative but determined. "Dad, I know things have been rough between you and Emily. But I want you to know, I'm here for you. Maybe I can help bridge the gap." Her words touched something deep inside me. For so long, I had felt isolated, like a shadow on the periphery of my own family. Sarah's outreach was a beacon, a chance to reconnect through a different channel. We started meeting regularly, just the two of us. She would come over for coffee, and we'd talk about everything, from her dreams of becoming a teacher to the complicated dynamics between her sister and me. Sarah never judged. She listened with a patience that was rare and precious. Her youthful perspective brought fresh hope, reminding me that families are complex, layered, and sometimes healing comes from the most unexpected places. With her quiet encouragement, I found the strength to keep reaching out to Emily, even when the silence seemed endless. Sarah's unexpected outreach was like a fresh breeze cutting through months of stagnant silence. At just 22, she was a bright spark of hope in the dimly lit corridors of my fractured family. Our first meeting was at a small cafe not far from my apartment. She arrived with a shy smile, her eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and nervousness. "Dad," she began, voice soft but steady. "I know things haven't been easy, but I want to help. Maybe I can be the bridge between you and Emily." Her words struck a chord I hadn't realized was still tender. For so long, I'd felt locked out of my daughter's life, an outsider watching from the sidelines. Sarah's offer felt like a lifeline. We began to meet regularly, sometimes weekly, sometimes just when the weight of everything became too much to carry alone. Our conversations ranged from light-hearted, her stories about college antics, favorite music, silly memes, to deeply personal discussions about family, trust, and forgiveness. She told me about her complicated feelings watching the rift between her sister and me grow. How it hurt her to see us drift apart, yet how scared she was of choosing sides. "I don't want to lose either of you," she said quietly one afternoon, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her coffee cup. I assured her she wouldn't lose me. That despite everything, I loved both my daughters fiercely. Through Sarah, I caught glimpses of Emily I hadn't seen in months. The sister she was, the woman she was becoming. I learned of the pressures Emily faced, the expectations from Thomas's family, the struggle to balance two worlds. Sarah also became an unexpected ally in mending fences. She gently encouraged Emily to talk to me, to let go of some of the resentment that had built up. One day, after a particularly long conversation, Sarah handed me a note from Emily. It was brief, but it meant more than words. "Dad, I'm ready to talk. When you are." That moment felt like a breakthrough, a crack in the wall of silence that had kept us apart for too long. I realized healing was possible, but it would take time, patience, and the willingness to listen, truly listen. Emily's message felt like a fragile thread reaching out through the darkness, a small sign that the walls we'd built between us might finally begin to crumble. When she called a few days later, my heart raced, part hope, part fear. "Dad," she said hesitantly, "can we meet? I want to try, really try this time." We agreed to meet at a quiet park, a place where we could speak without interruptions, surrounded by the gentle rustle of leaves and the soft murmur of a nearby creek. Sitting across from each other on a weathered bench, we began tentatively, sharing awkward smiles and nervous laughter. Emily spoke first, her voice trembling. She admitted to feeling overwhelmed by the pressure from Thomas's family, the weight of expectations, and the guilt she carried for pushing me away. "I was scared," she confessed. "Scared of disappointing you and myself." I listened, the years of pain and silence melting away in that moment. I shared my own regrets, of not reaching out sooner, of holding on to pride instead of love. We talked for hours, slowly unpacking the hurts that had defined our fractured relationship. It wasn't a perfect conversation, and it certainly wasn't an instant fix. But it was real, raw, honest. For the first time in a long time, I saw hope reflected in her eyes. As we parted that day, I felt a cautious optimism, the beginning of a new chapter, written not in silence, but in understanding. That day in the park was not just a meeting, it was a turning point. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine and fresh earth after an early spring rain. Birds sang softly overhead, their melodies a stark contrast to the heaviness that had weighed on my heart for so long. Emily arrived hesitantly, her posture guarded but eyes searching for a connection. We sat side by side on the worn wooden bench, the gentle flow of the creek nearby offering a quiet soundtrack to our fragile reunion. For a long time, we just sat, two souls separated by years of misunderstandings and unspoken words, yet connected by an unbreakable bond. Slowly, Emily began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper at first. "I'm sorry," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "For pushing you away, for not trusting you, for everything." I reached out and took her hand in mine, rough, calloused from years of hard work, but steady. "It's not just your burden," I replied softly. "I wasn't perfect either. I should have tried harder to reach you." We talked for hours, memories flowing like the creek beside us. Moments of laughter, pain, lost opportunities, and the hopes we still held on to. She told me about the pressure she felt living in a world so different from the one I had built for her. A world filled with luxury and expectations, where she sometimes felt like a stranger to herself. "I didn't know how to ask for help," she admitted. "So I ran." I understood then that her distance wasn't betrayal but fear. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold, something inside us had shifted. It wasn't a magical fix, but a quiet beginning, a willingness to rebuild, one honest conversation at a time. As we walked back toward our cars, the weight of years felt a little lighter. The path ahead was still long and uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. The days following our heartfelt conversation in the park marked the beginning of a slow but steady journey toward rebuilding our family bond. The wounds were still fresh, but the cracks in the wall between Emily and me were growing wider, letting in light and hope. We kept up our regular meetings, sometimes sharing stories over coffee, other times simply sitting in comfortable silence, learning to appreciate each other's presence without the need for words. The awkwardness that had once filled the spaces between us gradually gave way to genuine connection. Emily began opening up about her dreams and fears, revealing sides of herself she had long kept hidden behind a facade of strength. I shared stories from my own youth, lessons learned from mistakes, and the quiet hopes I still held for our future. Slowly, the inheritance stopped being a silent barrier and became a foundation for new possibilities. I invested in creating a small scholarship fund in my hometown, a way to honor Emily's mother's memory and give back to the community that had shaped us both. It was a gesture that spoke louder than any words, a testament to forgiveness, growth, and the power of family. One afternoon, Emily called me with a tentative smile in her voice. "Dad," she said, "I want to thank you for not giving up on me, for teaching me that family isn't just about money or mistakes, it's about love and second chances." As I listened, I felt a deep peace settle within me. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but together, we could face whatever came our way. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't about retribution, it's about healing and moving forward with an open heart. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched you, please like and subscribe for more emotional tales of family, justice, and unexpected redemption. Don't forget to check out our other stories on the channel. There's always another journey waiting to be heard.